Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, PyFunds, for the invitation to speak to you tonight. Before we start, I think I owe you all an apology. I know it is a common practice in this country to start your speeches with a joke or a funny remark. And though you would never pick this up from my accent, but I am German, it is genetically impossible for me. That said, I've been in New Zealand for 13 years. I do carry that little black passport as well these days, and I'm a proud New Zealander as well. And though I'm a proud New Zealander, or maybe because I'm a proud New Zealander, I am concerned about New Zealand's long-term economic performance. And the wonderful PyFunds experts will tell you everything about global markets and investment opportunities later, but I really want to talk about our country and how we could make this country go better. Before we get to that, let's just look at long-term economic performance. We know that we've got a bit of a problem in New Zealand with economic performance, with productivity. We know that we are no longer really in the club of really the world's richest economies and most productive economies, and you can see this on this slide. Let's look at this in a historical context. Once upon a time, when we go back to the year 1900, we were actually third placed after the United States and the United Kingdom. But look at what happened over these, well, a bit more than 100 years. It's a race, and unfortunately, New Zealand didn't win the race. We started off in a good position, but then especially towards the 1960s, 70s, we took a bit of a break from growth, and look where we finished. We finished bottom of that list. So that's GDP per capita. We can also look at another factor that you're all familiar with, and that's working hours. We know that every country works fewer hours than we used to, maybe 50, 60 years ago. But look at what happened in New Zealand. We started off, like all the other countries, with longer working hours, but the other countries produced their working hours a lot more than us. And actually, if you compare New Zealand today to countries like the Netherlands, we work about 400 hours more per year than the Dutch do. And why is that? Because the Dutch are more productive. The Dutch are getting more done for every hour of work. We don't, and therefore we work longer hours. We might take on an extra job. We might just work generally more. And we also work longer, actually, in our lives because we're just not productive, but we don't want to be poor. That's how we're compensating for that. We can also look at capital intensity. That's the amount of capital invested in the economy per hour worked. And again, if you go back a few decades, we're going back to the year 1955, you can see that we were actually quite a capital-intensive economy, relatively speaking, second to the United States. But again, look what happened over the years. The other countries actually increased their capital stock. New Zealand did not do that as much. And again, at the end of that period, we're at the bottom of the list. So no wonder we are not as productive, no wonder we are not as rich as other countries, because we haven't got the capital stock to actually propel this growth we would like to see in New Zealand. There is another way of looking at it, and that's economic indices. And I'm always careful about every individual index because, there's so many ways you can manipulate every index, as you know. But when all the indices are basically going down over the last few decades, you know we've got a bit of a problem. It doesn't matter what you look at, whether you look at competitiveness or economic freedom. Even on Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, there's a slight dip in the last few years. Human development is down, world happiness is down. At least we're doing a little bit better on the Climate Change Performance Index. That is, we went from 42nd to 37th. Well, New Zealand, unfortunately, we've got a bit of a problem here. We haven't actually done too well. And you know what? We haven't done too well at a time when the world was actually, broadly speaking, in order. This is the Economic Uncertainty Index. And for the past few decades, actually uncertainty wasn't so much of a problem. Of course, we had uncertainty during the pandemic, and of course, the spike right at the end, that is Trump. But before that, actually, we lived in relatively benign geopolitical times. We lived at a time after the end of the Cold War, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Francis Fukuyama, for example, told us, this is the end of history, it's all fine. And yet, New Zealand was not doing fine. So if we couldn't perform well at a time when the world was, broadly speaking, in order, Do we really think New Zealand is suddenly going to lift its performance now that we're experiencing financial crises and Brexit and Xi and Putin and the pandemic and who knows what else is going to come our way? So the good old times, the times of geopolitical stability are really over. And New Zealand now needs to lift its game regardless. That's going to be a problem. And that's adding to our long-standing New Zealand productivity paradox. The paradox is actually that a lot of the settings we have in New Zealand are actually quite okay. We have a stable democracy. I mean, despite everything you might want to say about our actual politicians. We have, by and large, a system that's governed by the rule of law. We have strong governance frameworks. We have still a low perception of corruption, even though it's gone down a little bit. We are still ranked among the freest countries on the planet. And because of these settings, organizations like the OECD keep telling us we should be richer than the average OECD economy. The OECD thinks we should be 25% above the average OECD GDP per capita numbers. In fact, we're 25% below. And as I said, all our performance indicators are pointing in the same direction: low GDP per capita, low factor productivity, low labor productivity, low capital intensity, and low economic complexity. So something is not quite right. And that is the New Zealand productivity paradox. As I said, it was a paradox for a long time. It might no longer be a paradox in the future because we're actually performing more poorly on many of these factors. So how come we've got this paradox, and what explains it when actually a lot of our institutions are not too bad? Well, there are a few that are really crazy where we could be doing a lot better, and I want to talk about them. So let's talk about the efficiency of government. This is what a normal country looks like. And now I've said normal country, you know this is not New Zealand. In normal countries, you have a sector of the economy like education, or like the environment, or health. And then you have a department for the environment, for health, or for education. And then you have a ministerial portfolio for education, environment, or health. And then you've got a minister in charge of that portfolio. And as you can see, the names here are Oddmund Heul, Andreas Bjelland, Eriksson, and by now you guess it, this is Norway. I've chosen Norway because it's a country that's about the same size as New Zealand, about 5 million people, and that's how they run their country. I could have taken many other countries. I mean, even the US runs like this, and they're slightly bigger than us. Germany runs like this, Ireland runs like this, Denmark runs like this. Practically every country on the planet runs like this. And now we look at New Zealand. This is us. We have the same sectors in the economy, but we somehow managed to split them into 43 different departments and ministries, and 81 ministerial portfolios, and 28 ministers inside and outside cabinet. By the way, Ireland has a constitutional limit. They have only 15 ministers in their entire cabinet government. We have 19 ministers alone in charge of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. This is madness. And I just want to give you a few examples just so you get the madness. We have a minister for housing. That's Chris Bishop. You all know Chris Bishop. But we also have a minister of building and construction, and that's Chris Penk. As if housing and building and construction didn't have anything to do with each other. Well, at least both ministers are called Chris. We have a minister of defense, and that's Judith Collins. I mean, to the degree that New Zealand still has a defense force. Sorry, that's a joke. But when you retire from the armed forces, the minister in charge of you for Veterans Affairs is once again Chris Penk, when he's not dealing with building and construction. You see, this is madness. No other country runs like this, and we give the public service 5 or 6 times the opportunity to say no to any reform we want to drive through because we've got all of these different ministers in charge. And as I said, 19 ministers dealing with MB, or MB reporting to 19 ministers. I sometimes think it's the other way around. I think it's actually the ministers reporting to MB because MB's running the show. Because once you have 19 ministers in charge of a department, it means no one is in charge of a department, and the department runs the politicians. That's a problem we have. Now, let's talk about something else. We have to talk about trade because, we talk about trade all the time, especially because of Trump. This is a time that is really difficult for trade, but we're not starting it in a good position. Small economies typically have a high degree of their GDP traded internationally. Look at Ireland, look at the Netherlands, look at Switzerland, look at Denmark. In New Zealand, 51% of our GDP is traded. For a small economy, this is abysmally bad. Yes, we are a free trading nation. We don't believe in tariffs. We are quite open in our markets, but that doesn't mean we actually trade. We basically sit here and trade with ourselves. No country ever got rich by trading among each other. We have to really trade with the world. We also have to be much better in integrating international value chains when it comes to foreign capital. So here we have foreign capital, foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP, and as you can see, that green dot, that's us, New Zealand. We have made it ridiculously hard for foreigners to come here and to invest because they have to deal with the Overseas Investment Office and the Overseas Investment Act. We actually say in the Act that it is a privilege to invest in New Zealand, where most other countries actually roll out the red carpet and try to get companies to invest. And it's not just the money we're missing out on. We're missing out on the connections into international markets, the value chains, the expertise, the management techniques. We are basically sitting here and we're not actually participating in the game. And that game is only becoming harder, of course, because we see the world disintegrating economically. We haven't actually made the most of globalization. We urgently have to do that now in much harder circumstances. Now, we also have to talk about fiscal incentives. New Zealand is one of the most centralized countries in the world when it comes to government. 91% of government spending and government taxation run through Wellington. The OECD average, that's the club of the richest economy, is about 2/3 central and the rest is devolved. In some countries, of course, they've got states, Länder, cantons, and of course, there's always local government. New Zealand is the complete outlier. We are so centralized, everything is running through Wellington. Now, you would ask, why is this a problem? Well, I can give you an example and an answer. The example is here, Auckland. We all know Auckland is going to grow by hundreds of thousands of people over the coming decades. Except if you are the mayor of Auckland or if you're a councillor, you wouldn't really want to see this because it's a loss-making business for you as a council. Because when it comes to growth, what happens is we say, hey, council, can you please build the infrastructure, build the roads, lay the pipes, make sure the water is there, build the community infrastructure, build a pool, build a library. Then, of course, you have to deal with the NIMBYs. You all know what NIMBYs are, right? Not in my backyard. You also have to deal with the bananas. Do you know bananas? Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. So it's a political cost. It's a financial cost for council, it's a political cost for councils, and therefore Auckland Council is not really happy to build. But what happens when the building gets done? The GST out of it, the corporate taxes, the income taxes, they go to Wellington. So we never really solve our problems there if we continue down that centralization path. We have to learn from countries that are doing better than us, and there are many of them out there. And we, at the New Zealand Initiative, have visited many of them over the past few years. We went to Switzerland, to Denmark, to Ireland, and to the Netherlands. What we learned was actually that all of these countries have recipes for success. In the Swiss case, I mentioned it's decentralization because they don't do this like us. They actually have cantons and councils. It's a country of 9 million people with 2,000 councils, and each council has its own income tax. Sounds crazy, but it works. Denmark, highly efficient government, highly taxed economy, but it works better because government as such is better constituted. They don't do this madness that we do with our knitting diagram that I showed you earlier. Ireland, open to foreign capital, superb education system, low corporate taxes. They, once upon a time, said to themselves, we don't want to be the poorhouse of Europe any longer. We want to grow, and by God, they did. They are twice as rich as us today. And the Netherlands, fantastic infrastructure once again. For a country that basically lives to a large degree under sea level, they had to get their act together so they didn't drown. And then they learned a thing or two about infrastructure and working together with people you don't like because otherwise you both drown. And then they applied this to other areas of the economy, and that's why they're so successful. Whereas us in New Zealand, well, Our unique narrative is more like, we don't know how lucky we are, we live in God's sons, we've got the number 8 warrior mentality, yeah, now, 100%. We've heard this before. The problem is we don't have a growth narrative in this country. When you go to all of these other countries, it doesn't matter who you talk to, people left, right, and center, business, academics, journalists, they tell you all the same stories. They know what makes their country tick. They know what makes their country grow. We don't. If we had a delegation from Switzerland or Denmark or Ireland visiting New Zealand, after a week, I guarantee you they would leave confused because we don't tell them what we are. Because we've got so many conflicting narratives, but in the end, we always console ourselves that somehow this is a beautiful country and it's wonderful and we're all friendly people. And that's all true, but it doesn't make us grow. And it hasn't made us grow for decades. And now, to conclude, this is one example that really drives me crazy. I'm a great tech geek. I'm a great AI fan. But you know, KPMG surveyed about 40 countries around the world on their attitudes towards AI, and we came almost bottom of the list. Only Australia was marginally worse than us, which is great for New Zealand, of course. We were not excited about AI. We said, oh, really, the benefits, I'm not so sure, and I don't know whether I like it, and not kind of our thing, and maybe it's cheating. Anyway, meanwhile, Nigeria, Egypt, Turkey, they all love this because for them it's an opportunity to get rich finally. But New Zealand, yeah, no. Meanwhile, the other side of the diagram, when you ask countries, do you think AI should be regulated? New Zealand is top of the list. Absolutely, we want to regulate it. We've got no idea what it is. We don't know whether it will do any good, but let's regulate it. This is the New Zealand mindset, and this is the mindset that has to change if we want to get richer. And so, in conclusion, we have to change our attitudes, but we also have to change our policies. And I mean, looking at the current New Zealand government, we have great success in education reform with Erica Stanford, who's doing a stellar job on that. We have made some timid steps towards opening ourselves up to FDI, foreign capital. We will see in a couple of weeks the changes to the IMA, which has held the country back for 3 decades. But we still have to do a lot more. We have to simplify our government. We have to really abolish this diagram I showed you, because otherwise you can't run a country properly. You can't govern a country like that. We have to reform our public service so the public service actually serves the public, because currently it basically serves itself. We've got 65,000 bureaucrats sitting in Wellington. It used to be 47,000 in 2017. We have to do better than that with fewer people, but more qualified people. And we have to consolidate our finances, because unlike the US that can get away with a 6% budget deficit, New Zealand can't, because it's a nice to have in everybody's portfolio. Nobody needs to be here. We can't get away with our fiscal position like that. And that's where I leave it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we can reform the country.